And you see Donna playing around with dirty brushes, and she's jumping from her greens to her pinks to her purples and blues, you know, and a lot of it is nice to blend together as long as they're on the same side of the color wheel. Right, so that's the biggest trick of, you know, not mixing opposites together, and then you won't get that mud brown, unless you want mud brown. Alright, so I'll show you guys again this color wheel. If you don't have one of these guys, they're pretty handy. They're fun to play with. Alright, so you can definitely see that if you mix green and purple together, you're going to get brown. If you're going to put orange and blue together, you'll end up with brown in the middle, right? So anything across from the color wheel definitely will always give you brown. Then if you mix all these colors together, then you'll start getting black, right? So it's the olive colors, and then white being the absence of all colors, right? So when you're mixing and trying to play with different tones, definitely it helps to stay with the colors that are on the same side of the wheel, and then you'll get different beautiful purple tones, blue tones, teal tones, right, throughout your colors. But as soon as you start adding a little bit of anything from this side, it starts to drab things down. So it's a good thing to know when things are too bright. Right? So again, to cancel out each other, you're going to put a little bit of this color into that side of the wheel. Does that kind of make sense for a layman's kind of quick color explanation? Because that's what I do hear a lot of, is that yucky brown tone that people end up getting when they're trying to mix new colors. And but as long as you have that in mind, where you have that color wheel in sides, that's really all you have to do, is kind of stay on one side or the other side, being green and red being maybe your top and bottom, and then you're definitely going to have those sides that will either complement each other or contrast with each other. Right? So that's a big thing that I'm seeing a lot. A lot of people are starting to get a little bit more braver with creating more colors. And usually it's just because Donna has a dirty brush, right? She loves playing around with going back and forth with her pinks, especially the magenta and the greens. Those are probably one of her biggest ones that she likes to play around with. Okay, so just to play around with those one-stroke leaves a little bit with you here. I just have a 12. Right, and if you just concentrate with half and half, it's pretty safe to do with your one-stroke leaves. That way you get a nice contrast of both colors going on, right? But a lot of people are confused with the one-stroke leaf because it has changed through the years, right? So before, Donna used to start with a flat back and then push down and then turn to a point, right? So you gotta really slowly bump both sides and slowly turn so that you get a nice smooth look, right? But when you start creating them on vines, right, you want to give them stems. If you do that flat back leaf, it kind of looks funny on a stem, right? So this is where Donna started to go a little bit. You're starting on the same angle as the vine and you're pushing forward to a point, right? So it's a little bit more of an angle to angle. So you're starting at your point, slowly pushing down, fattest in the middle, and then up to your point. So you see how I have a little bit of a point start instead of the flat start. Right? So this is where the flat start is wonderful when we're doing our sunflowers, but definitely with creating the one-stroke leaves, this one was definitely a little bit too messy there, then definitely you can always go over it again, right? And I haven't put any floating medium on my brush yet, right? Just sticking with a lot of paint, and this paper is really dry, so it does suck up a little bit. But one of the things that I find too is people try to go 100 miles an hour. So if you go a little slower, the paint will actually absorb into the paper. And when you're pushing down, I'm doing this slow for you guys, but also I'm doing it for the paper. See, I'm getting beautiful coverage. If I go and try to do this quicker, I'm gonna get more draggy strokes, right? Especially on paper. Right, and I really do highly suggest you guys push yourselves on paper. We definitely do have, the plastic sheets that make things a lot easier and slipperier, right? But sometimes it's almost too slippery, right? And people are still having a hard time with it. If you're going to be practicing to paint on glass all the time, then yes, definitely keep pushing yourself to perfect it on the plastic. But if you want to do canvas work or maybe a wooden sign or anything like that, Donna has all of her plaques that she's making now, all her different wood cutouts and stuff, and people are painting on them. So it's definitely good to practice on paper more than plastic. So then that way when you get to that kind of surface, you feel comfortable already with that bit of a drag. Right? Does that seem to work better for you when you go a little slower? You don't need as much floating medium. That's one of the biggest things that people, I find that they are fighting with, is the coverage, right? The only time you really need any floating medium in your paint is when you want to do really, really skinny little chisel lines. Then you need it to drag a little further. Then yes, you need a little bit more moisture, right? And especially if we want to put those little stems in there nice and thin, right? It's nice to have a little bit of a slip to it, right? To get that line really, really nice and thin inside your stem, right? So sometimes we do need a little bit of slip, but I always put just the very smallest amount at a time. One thing I do kind of show you in my first course one is just a very, very simple, oops, going backwards. I wanted my paint to go in the same direction as my puddles. All right, so again with that rosebud, right, it's good to get that U stroke down, understand, how you're doing the simple rosebud, right? Is what I get you guys doing in my first course. So you got the upside down U and the inverted U. And then we put those together and we have a nice simple rosebud. And that's all I get you to do in my first course. Right? Just because I know that, you guys are just starting to understand the comma stroke. Right? And you have to understand that comma stroke to get it right in there with your little rosebud. Right, so you're curling that comma stroke a little bit more sideways. Right, so I broke it all down in the first course. Then I slowly say, okay, let's forget about the roses for now. And then we get more into all your teardrops and all your one-stroke leaves in the second course. Right, so getting you just used to the pressure, pushing down, popping up on your chisel. Right, you're getting used to the U stroke. So now we're going to have a pivot point with that U stroke, and we'll create a teardrop. Right, so I slowly bump you into harder and harder strokes. Right? Then again, a lot of people who are brand new to it, they're like, oh, this is so much work, and just to learn these three, get into the third course. That's why I decided to throw the liner practice in there as course number 3, because I felt like by that time you kind of needed something easier to play with, and then also something to learn about getting up on that chisel, a really tiny little line, pushing down on your chisel, having that thickness up on the chisel, and then down again, right? So I get you guys to play like that with your liner brush, right? So then by the time you get to course number 4, you're a little bit more comfortable with doing those daisy strokes, right? You're learning about pressure, you're learning up to get in that chisel, right? So daisy strokes are straight up and down, and then right through the middle, so you see the dark on both sides. Right, so sometimes we have our angles off, or we're putting too much pressure on one side than the other. then you'll end up with that light following over on the one side. If you're a little bit heavy on this side, maybe you're left-handed, you might end up with your white following through on the other side. These are not 100% bad. I call them lazy daisies, right? So when you start to play around with all those little movements going straight up, down, a little bit lazy, you know, you're basically almost there with your comma stroke. Is having that white follow over to the side. All right, so I'd break things down definitely a lot different, and then how things hybrid into it. And I hope you guys will go back and see the last couple of videos I did before, just strictly all on the comma stroke and how it goes into each stroke changes, right? So you got your teardrop. Well, half of a teardrop is a comma stroke on the way out. Right, so once you start getting all those little connections, then when I start getting you guys to do shell strokes, right, you're pushing, washing the floor. Well, this last one here again is our comma stroke. All right, so when you go back to practice a few of these, then you go back to that comma stroke again, then you start to get the connection of how that pressure guiding the brush around and it's sliding up to your chisel, right? And then definitely practicing both directions. There's always going to be one harder or easier for the other one, right? So this is why I try not to overwhelm you with too many different strokes all at once, because again, once you're starting to catch the connection, if I change you off to different directions too much, unless you're ready for it, right? So sometimes these are good little warm-ups, and then I've got always a few students with me in different levels there. Like Sue's been she's one of my OGs that was been with me right from the beginning when I first started building these courses. So, you know, and she's still here playing around and you know, playing with those strokes to try to get them perfected, right? There's always start somewhere and then keep playing and pushing yourself. Right, so a lot of times Donna will like to wipe out her brush. She doesn't even clean it. And then I like to flip my plate around so I'm in the right direction where I'm going. You know, and then you can go and lightly load your brush with a little bit of green, and then when you push down, sometimes you still get those little bits of pink kind of popping through. All right, so we've got our gradient with the light white and pink. Lightly wipe it, because maybe I wiped too much. Then lightly blend the green in. And you'll see when you go to push down, you should have, you know, a variety of little tones in there. Right? Sometimes you will go and add just that slight bit of pink in there and go over it once or twice, but don't go back a lot, because if you over mix it, then you start losing all those little extra tones that you can get in there. Right? See how that has that little bit of pink in there? But if you over mix it, right, this is what happens when we start getting brave and start adding different tones. We over mix, then it really starts to get drawby, right, if you have too much pink in there. But it's nice to have those warmer green tones, little darker tones. There's times for it, right? But if you do want bright colors, and because you're playing around with dirty brushes, right, you're just going in once or twice, so then that way you're not over mixing. Right, so the variety of having all these different colors in your vine makes it really nice too, right? Even though you guys are still at a beginner stage, you want to do something simple, just playing around with a couple different tones with your greens, right? You can leave the bright green there, maybe just add a little bit of pink to your dark green. It'll make it a little bit more brown color, right? But you still have a nice bright green at the top. So there's different ways of playing around with adding color, right? Adding tones to the green. If you really want one color, or if you want to lightly blend, right? Wipe out, come up, but you're really only going once and twice. Your brush is already good and loaded. You can see that the pink is still all under there, right? So play around